For thousands of years, the greatest minds in history have asked the same question. Not what is power? Everyone thinks they know that, but where does it come from? Why do some people have it without seeking it, while others chase it forever and never find it? Machiavelli studied it through politics, Sun Tzu through war, Hobbes through civilization itself, Foucault through hidden social structures, Nietzsche through the human soul. Different centuries, different methods, and they all arrived at the same conclusion. Today we trace that conclusion. Stay until the end. You'll never look at power the same way again. Part 1. Machiavelli and the Myth of Moral Power. We begin with the philosopher whose name became an insult. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince in the early 16th century, observing the brutal political reality of Renaissance Italy, a world of constant betrayal, shifting alliances, and rulers who rose and fell with terrifying speed. And what Machiavelli discovered, through cold observation rather than moral theory, was something most people still refuse to accept. Power and virtue are not the same thing, and the ruler who confuses them does not survive. This sounds cynical. It is not meant as cynicism. It is meant as observation. Machiavelli watched rulers who tried to govern purely through goodness, through generosity, through trust, through keeping every promise regardless of circumstance, and he watched them lose everything to rulers who understood something colder. That the world does not reward good intentions. It rewards accurate perception of reality. The ruler who believes people are fundamentally trustworthy will be betrayed by the portion of people who are not, and he has no defense prepared for it. The ruler who sees people clearly, capable of loyalty and capable of betrayal, capable of virtue and capable of self-interest, often within the same person, can prepare for both. This is Machiavelli's foundational insight, and it is the first thread in the pattern we are tracing today. Power does not come from being good. It comes from seeing clearly. The person who sees the world as they wish it to be will be perpetually surprised by it. The person who sees the world as it actually is will rarely be caught off guard. Machiavelli's famous misunderstood line, that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, is not an endorsement of cruelty. Part 2. Sun Tzu and the Art of Unspent Force. Move now across the world, more than 1,000 years earlier, to ancient China. Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, was studying something that seems entirely unrelated to philosophy, military strategy. But buried inside his strategic principles is a theory of power so precise it has outlasted the empires it was written for. His most famous teaching is also his most misunderstood. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. People hear this and imagine clever tactics, deception, outmaneuvering. But the deeper meaning is about something else entirely, the relationship between power and its expenditure. Sun Tzu observed that the commander who must constantly demonstrate strength through battle is, paradoxically, revealing weakness, because true strength does not need to be proven repeatedly. It only needs to be understood. An army with overwhelming, undeniable strength does not need to fight every battle. Its strength is visible in its readiness, and that visibility alone often prevents the conflict from ever beginning. The army that fights constantly is the army whose strength is in question. Every battle is, in a sense, an argument that needed to be made because the opponent did not already believe it. Now translate this from warfare to human life, because this is exactly where the principle leads. Part 3. Hobbes and the terrifying honesty about human nature. Now we move to 17th century England, into the mind of a philosopher who looked directly at humanity without flinching and produced one of the bleakest, most influential political theories ever written. Thomas Hobbes, writing in the aftermath of brutal civil war, asked a question almost nobody before him had been willing to ask honestly. What are human beings actually like before society shapes them? His answer, famous, controversial, and uncomfortably accurate in certain conditions, was that the natural state of human beings, without structure, without law, without enforced order, is a state of war. Not constant violence necessarily, but constant readiness for it. A world where every person, lacking any guarantee of safety, must treat every other person as a potential threat. He called this natural condition a war of every man against every man. This sounds extreme, but Hobbes was not describing humanity as inherently evil. He was describing what happens to humanity in the absence of structure. And here is where his insight about power becomes essential to our pattern. Hobbes argued that power, in its most fundamental form, is not granted by goodness or earned by merit. It exists in the vacuum of certainty. Where there is no clear structure, no enforced consequence, no reliable order, power flows to whoever is willing to act decisively while others hesitate. This is precisely why, in moments of genuine chaos, a crisis, a collapse, a breakdown of normal structure, certain people seem to rise almost instantly into positions of authority. Part 4. Foucault and the Power You Cannot See. Now we leap forward nearly 300 years, into the 20th century, to a philosopher who studied power in its most invisible and modern form. Michel Foucault did not write about kings or armies. He wrote about prisons, hospitals, schools, the ordinary institutions of daily life, and discovered something about power that none of the earlier thinkers had fully articulated. Power, Foucault argued, is not primarily something held by a person or an institution and exercised downward onto others. Power is a network, a field, something that operates through everyone, all the time, often without anyone consciously wielding it. His most famous example was the panopticon, a prison design where a single watchtower could observe every cell, but the prisoners could never know if they were actually being watched at any given moment. The genius of this design, Foucault observed, was that the prisoners began to police themselves. Because they could not be certain when they were being observed, they behaved as though they always were. The power of the watchtower was not in the watching. It was in the possibility of being watched. Now extend this insight beyond prisons, because Foucault certainly did. Most of the power that shapes human behavior in modern life does not come from someone directly forcing compliance. It comes from the internalized awareness of potential observation, potential judgment, potential consequence. People conform not because someone is actively forcing them to. They conform because they have learned to monitor themselves, as though the watchtower is always occupied. Here is the crucial insight for our pattern today. The person who has fully internalized this watchtower, who polices their own behavior constantly based on imagined judgment, has handed enormous power to an audience that may not even be paying attention. But the person who has examined this mechanism, recognized it for what it is, and consciously stepped outside of it, who acts according to their own genuine values rather than imagined observation. Part 5. Nietzsche and the psychology beneath it all. We now arrive at the philosopher who tied these threads together more explicitly than perhaps any other. Friedrich Nietzsche, writing in the late 19th century, diagnosing the psychological roots beneath all the political and social observations the others had made. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is often misunderstood as simple ambition or domination. It is something far more fundamental. He proposed that the deepest drive in every living thing is not survival, not pleasure, not even reproduction, but the expansion of its own capability, the drive toward becoming more fully and completely itself. And from this foundation, Nietzsche made an observation that connects directly to everything Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, Hobbes, and Foucault had already described from their different angles. Most human beings, Nietzsche argued, do not pursue this expansion directly. They have been taught, through morality, through religion, through social convention, to distrust their own will to power and to disguise it instead. This produces what he called slave morality, a value system built not around genuine strength, but around the management and restraint of strength, originating from those who lacked it and needed protection from those who had it. And this is the psychological mechanism underneath every political observation we have covered today. The reason power flows toward those who see clearly, who maintain reserve, who provide certainty in chaos, who step outside invisible systems of judgment, is that all of these behaviors require the same underlying psychological condition. A person who has not disguised or suppressed their own genuine drive toward capability. A person who has done the difficult internal work of facing themselves honestly, rather than hiding behind socially comfortable self-deceptions. Part 6. The convergence, what all five actually agree on. Now we step back and look at the full pattern. 5 philosophers, 5 different centuries, 5 completely different methods of inquiry: political observation, military strategy, social contract theory, institutional analysis, and psychological philosophy. And when you lay their conclusions side by side, here is what becomes undeniable. They are all describing the same phenomenon from different angles. Machiavelli. Power comes from seeing reality clearly. not from believing in how reality should be. Sun Tzu, power that does not need to constantly prove itself is more powerful than power that must perform. Hobbes, power flows toward whoever provides clarity and decisiveness in moments of uncertainty. Foucault, the deepest power lies in becoming free of invisible systems of observation and judgment that most people unconsciously obey. Nietzsche, all of this is only possible for a person who has done the internal work of genuine self-mastery, becoming who they actually are rather than performing who they were taught to be. Put these together and a single, unified theory of power emerges. Power is not primarily something you do to other people. It is something you build inside yourself. Part 7. Why this conclusion terrifies most people. This conclusion is uncomfortable for a specific reason. It removes every excuse. If power were simply about birth, about luck, about external circumstance, you could comfortably explain why you don't have it. The system is unfair. The opportunities weren't there. The people who succeeded had advantages you didn't. And there is truth in this. External circumstance matters. Inequality is real. This is not a claim that effort alone determines outcome in every case. But the unified conclusion across these 5 philosophers points to something that exists underneath circumstance, something available, at least in principle, regardless of where you started. The clarity of seeing the world as it actually is, rather than as you wish it were. The discipline of building genuine capability rather than performing it. The decisiveness of providing stability in moments others find chaotic. The freedom of stepping outside the systems of judgment that quietly govern most people's choices. The internal work of becoming who you actually are, beneath every layer of inherited fear and social performance. Part 8. The 8 principles that emerge from all 5 traditions. When you extract the practical instruction from this convergence, 8 principles emerge, each one supported by multiple, independent philosophical traditions. Principle 1. See reality before you act on it. From Machiavelli, before any strategy, before any decision, the foundation is accurate perception. Most failures in power are failures of perception that occurred long before the failure of action. Principle 2. Build reserve, not performance. From Sun Tzu, develop capability that exists, whether or not anyone is watching. The performance of strength is a sign that genuine strength has not yet been built. Principle 3. Become the source of clarity and confusion. From Hobbes, in moments where others hesitate, uncertain and anxious, the person who can act with calm decisiveness accumulates authority that does not need to be requested. Principle 4. Examine your own internalized watchtower. From Foucault, identify the invisible audience you have been performing for. Family expectation, social judgment, inherited belief about what you should want, and consciously evaluate whether their judgment deserves the authority you have given it. Principle 5. Choose your values rather than inheriting them. From Nietzsche, most people operate on a moral and personal framework they never actually selected. Genuine power requires the difficult work of examining every inherited belief and keeping only what survives honest scrutiny. Principle 6. Let consistency replace explanation. A synthesis across all 5. The person whose actions are predictable, not boring, but reliably aligned with stated values, accumulates trust that argument alone never produces. Principle 7. Accept that genuine power is often invisible for a long time. The Watchtower's power exists whether or not it is occupied. The reserve army's power exists whether or not it fights. Real internal development frequently produces no visible external result for extended periods. And the person who quits during this invisible phase never discovers what the internal work was building toward. Principle 8. Understand that power without internal foundation collapses. This is the principle most ignored and most important. Every tradition we examined agrees, in different language, that power acquired without this internal foundation, through luck, through manipulation, through circumstance alone, does not hold. The moment circumstance shifts, it collapses, because it was never built on anything that belonged to the person holding it.